In this video, we're going to look at an introduction to inverses of functions, and specifically just some examples of how to find inverses of some relatively easy linear functions. And we'll get a little bit more complicated as we go. So first and foremost, here's the process of finding an inverse. To find the inverse of a function, we switch the x and the y in the equation. And you know sometimes it's not listed as y, sometimes it's listed as like f of x or g of x or just in a different notation. So we switch the x and the y, or in other words, maybe it's in a different notation. You get the point. Hopefully. All right. And then the second part of that is we just solve for y, and that simple process gives us the inverse function of a particular given function. So not too difficult. Let's check out a couple examples. Number one, here's the process again, just so you can look up and refer to it as we go along. Example number one, we want to find the inverse function. And again, this notation just means the inverse of f of x. This is not f to the negative 1. This is the inverse of f of x. A little bit confusing, but as we use it more and more, hopefully you'll get the gist here. So find the inverse of f of x if f of x equals this particular function. So we're going to follow our process that's outlined up here. To find the inverse, we switch in the x and the y, and let's just rewrite this so that we have an x and a y. So we have y equals 2x minus 5. So what we do is we take the x and the y, and we switch them. So the x comes where the y is, the y comes where the x is. So we have x equals 2 times y minus 5. And then from there, we want to solve for y, or in other words, get y by itself, or isolate y. So in order to do that, we need to undo what's being done to it. So first thing, order of operations, when we're working backwards, we start by getting rid of addition and subtraction. So here we've got a minus 5. I need to add 5 to both sides. So I get x plus 5 is equal to 2y. And then we want to get y by itself, so we divide both sides by 2. Divide by 2. So what I'm left with is this function, x plus 5 over 2 equals y, or in other words, equals the inverse of f of x. And that's it. This is my inverse function. So whatever this does to a particular value, this is going to undo it so that you get that value right back. And that's it. That's my final answer. I'm going to box that and move on. Second example, pretty similar here. Got a different function, g of x. And we want to find the inverse of g, or g inverse of x. So again, we're going to switch the x and the y so that I have x equals 4y plus 1. Don't change anything else about the equation. And then to go through and solve, again, we got to undo what's being done to y. So I need to subtract 1 from both sides. I get x minus 1 equals 4y. And then divide by 4, divide by 4. So I'm left with this function, x minus 1 divided by 4 equals, and technically that's equal to y, but we know that this is not f, it's g. We know that this is g inverse because it undoes whatever g did. And that's it. All right, one more quick example. And in this quick example, we're going to get a little bit more difficult. We want to find h inverse of 3 if h of x is equal to 3x minus 7. Now, let's think about what this is asking us to find. Number one, it's asking us to find h inverse of x. So first and foremost, we need to find the inverse function before we can do anything else. And then it's asking us to find the value of 3 in that inverse function. Okay? So number one, find the inverse. Find the inverse. Number two, we're going to plug in a 3 into that inverse function and see what that spits out. All right, so the first process is exactly the same. We want to find the inverse function. And in order to do that, we switch the x's and the y's. So we end up with x equals 3y minus 7. Go through that process like you just did. Solve for y. We're going to get x plus 7. We're going to add 7 to both sides is equal to 3y. And then divide by 3, and you end up with a function that looks like this. This is h inverse of x. And then the second thing is, what is h inverse of 3? So in other words, h inverse of 3 just means plug 3 in wherever you see an x into this inverse function. And that's going to look like this. 3 plus 7 divided by 3 is equal to 10 over 3. And that is the value of h inverse of 3.